In this video, we introduce the present middle and the present passive indicative of Koine Greek verbs. So you may or may not have heard this before, but Greek is a highly inflected language and it's going to change its forms based on the grammatical function of a verb or noun in a sentence. With respect to verbs, we've seen this particularly with the different tenses, that the present, the future, the imperfect, the aorist, the perfect, and the pluperfect are all formed in different kinds of ways. But this is also going to be true with voice. We have only encountered one voice so far in this class, the active voice, wherein the subject does the action. But this week we are being introduced to the other two voices in Greek. The middle voice, where the subject acts for him, her, or themself in some kind of way. And normally we're going to translate the middle voice with the word himself, herself, themself, or themselves, or itself. And then the passive voice, wherein the subject is acted upon in some way. And so, particularly in this video, we're going to be looking at the present, middle, and passive indicative. And what we're going to see is that we're going to look at the forms of the present, middle, passive indicative and the changes that happen, or the inflections that happen for the middle and the passive in the present tense. And later on in this course, we're going to see how these other tenses also inflect different ways for the middle and the passive voice. So to take a step back and talk about sort of the grammar and the translation of voice. The active voice and the passive voice should be familiar to us from English. We use the English active and the English passive. These are components of our language, even if we don't necessarily regularly use these words to describe what we are writing or what we are speaking. We still use them, and so the concept should be somewhat familiar to us. The middle voice is not a thing that we use in English, so we're going to need a little bit more of an explanation of that. And after we introduce the forms of the middle and the passive, we'll talk about the way that the middle functions in Koine Greek. But so here we have our middle in Greek, where the subject is again acting on or for themselves in some way. And we're going to see 4 different ways that a subject can act for themselves, on themselves, or for their own advantage. So our sort of overview here of the Greek voices: the active, which is familiar to us, where the subject does the action; the passive, where the subject is acted upon in some way; and then the middle, where the subject acts for him or herself. And so here we have our forms of the primary, middle, and passive. So this is what you're going to be asked to memorize for this week. Just the suffixes, my, si, tai, mathas, they, ntai. But we want to make a couple different comments about how these suffixes make their way over into the present, middle, and passive indicative of luo. So notice that this paradigm covers both the present middle and the present passive. So these aren't, when we use a slash here, these aren't combined voices. These are different voices, the present middle or the present passive. And these are going to be translated differently from one another, whether if it's a present middle or whether it's present passive, even though they are of the same form. So balomai, for example, could be I throw myself if it's in the middle, or it could be I am being thrown if it is in the passive. And so it's going to look the same no matter what. It's not going to change its form for a different form for the middle than it would for the passive. The form is going to be exactly the same. And the only way that you're going to know whether you translate it as a middle or whether you translate it as a passive verb is based on the context of the sentence. And we'll give some clues later on in this video as to what in the context of the sentence might tell you which is happening. So, but a lot of the times it's simply going to be intuitive, and you just have to sort of figure it out based on what's going on in the Greek of the sentence. And then the other thing to note about these forms and how they make it into this paradigm connected to the verb stem here is the difference between this psi here and the a in the actual paradigm itself. And so what's going to happen is that for some verbs, not the present middle and not the present passive, but for example, the perfect middle and the perfect passive, you're actually going to see this psi ending, but in the present middle and the present passive, you're going to see the a ending. And this is because changes have happened when the connecting vowel has been added. So when you get this A added on to this psi ending, the sigma doesn't like to stand between two vowels. So it drops out, leaving epsilon plus alpha plus iota. And the epsilon, when it combines with the alpha here, is going to want to lengthen to an eta. So it goes to an eta and the alpha goes away. And when you have a long vowel, a iota likes to go under a long vowel, likes to sort of hide in there as its subscripts. And so the iota makes its way under the eta so that we get this A ending. So that's sort of the way that this change happens. So even though you're memorizing these primary middle passive suffixes, you should recognize the difference here, that this is the second singular ending, even though it looks different from what we have over here. And so we've shown you this sort of way that verbs form for all of the different verb forms that we've learned so far in this class. And we want to add on here the present middle passive indicative. So the way that the present middle passive indicative forms is it uses the stem, nothing before the stem, because it's not past tense, so we're not getting an augment. It's not perfect, so we're not getting reduplication. We just have the stem with nothing before it. Then we use a connecting vowel, omicron or epsilon. Then we get those endings added on, our endings here, so that the final result looks like this. So our final paradigm that we saw in that previous slide, just a little bit bigger here, is going to be luamai, lue, luatai, luamatha, luesthe, luantai. And that full paradigm is not what you're going to be memorizing for this week. You should be able to recognize forms from it, and you will be asked to do that on quizzes. But what you'll be memorizing is these suffixes. And so what we're going to do is first practice speaking the suffixes, because remember, if we can both speak and write things, that helps it stick in our memory a little bit better. So together, we're going to say these endings 3 different times, and then we're going to go ahead and practice writing them. So go ahead and say aloud with me our different endings here. We have my, psi, tai, mitha, stay, ntai. A little bit faster this time. My, psi, tai, mitha, stay, ntai. And one more time, even a little bit faster. My, psi, tai, mitha, stay, ntai. And so I've got this up here for writing the primary middle passive endings. Go ahead and take one more look at the endings here. Maybe say it aloud one more time. And let's go ahead and pause the lecture, and on your whiteboards, fill out your endings here. How did you do? If it looks like this, go ahead and give me a high five here. Boom. If not, we're going to give it another try. So take a look at these, and I'm going to take them away in just a second here. You have another opportunity for the high five. All right. Does yours look like this? Way to go. I'm sure it does. High five. Let's go ahead and look at some of the uses in the translation of the middle voice. So earlier in this video, we noted that we don't use the middle voice in English. So we're going to need a little bit more explanation about how the middle is used. And we're going to have four different uses or translations of the middle. And these are all taken directly over from Black's grammar. So you have the reference to these over there as well. So the first is the reflexive middle, where the subject does something to or for themselves. They act upon themselves in some way. And you'll see that a lot of these, most of these are going to be translated himself, herself, itself, or themselves, with a little bit different nuance of what's sort of actually going on there. The intensive middle is when the subject produces the action, but is not necessarily, so it's being emphasized that the subject is the one making the action happen. They're the producing the results of the action. We'll see some examples of this when we get to our practice translation at the end of the video here in a minute. Then the reciprocal middle is only when we have a plural subject. So a first person plural, second person plural, or a third person plural, and the group is acting among themselves in some way. So sometimes you'll see this translated with one another or simply just themselves. And the last one, and this is going to be actually the most common use of the middle in the New Testament, is what's called the deponent middle. And you'll often hear me speak of this just as the deponent. I'll leave out the middle part here. I'll say this verb is deponent. And when a verb is deponent, it means that it has middle or passive forms, but it's active in meaning. So we just translate it as we would an active verb. It's going to look like a middle verb. It's going to have those middle endings, but it's going to be translated actively. It doesn't have any active forms at all. And the vocabulary for this week is going to give you some examples of middle verbs, middle deponent verbs that occur frequently in the New Testament. So deponent, again, the most common form of the middle, and it's translated actively. So it's a middle in form, but active in meaning. And then moving over to a little bit of grammatical talk about the passive voice here. So in the passive voice, we've said that the subject is not doing the action. The subject is being acted upon. So then the question is, who is doing the action in the passive voice? And it is going to be the agent. And when you Google the agent, this is the image that comes up on Google Images. And this is from apparently the Pixar movie Bolt. But so agency, the agent is the one that does the action of the passive verb. The subject in the nominative case is not who does the subject, the action of the passive verb. So in Greek, something else has to be in the sentence to indicate who is doing that action. And there's 4 different ways that Greek will indicate who is doing the action of a passive verb. The first is what is called the direct agent, and it is indicated by hupa plus the genitive. And so this is when the passive verb is sort of directly produced by someone. So the person or thing that does the action of the passive verb to the subject, which will still be in the nominative case, is going to be in the genitive. So when you have the prepositional phrase hupa plus a genitive, the thing in the genitive is the one doing the action of the verb to the subject in the nominative case. If the agent or the one doing the action of the verb is sort of one step removed, is not directly doing the action, then you'll have dia plus the genitive, and this is normally translated through, and then whatever that genitive person or thing is there. So for example, I am taught Greek. So taught Greek is the passive verb. I is the one that's being acted upon. You are receiving the teaching by Dr. Elder. And in Greek, by Dr. Elder would be put into hupa plus the genitive. So Dr. Elder would be in the genitive case following upon hupa. And then if I wanted to say how Dr. Elder teaches, I am taught Greek by Dr. Elder through YouTube, I would do dia plus YouTube in the genitive. So a note about that is that you can have both of these in a Greek sentence. You can have both a direct agent and an intermediate agent, or you could have just one or the other. You could, in a sentence, have I am taught Greek by Dr. Elder. You could have I am taught Greek by Dr. Elder through YouTube, or you could just have I am taught Greek through YouTube with just dia plus the genitive. So you might have both of these, or you might have one or the other. And then the same is going to be true for an impersonal agent. So if something is even a sort of a further step removed from the agency, then it's particularly if it's more of like a thing that is doing the action of the verb, you're going to see it in the dative case, sometimes with the preposition in preceding it, but not always. The N does not necessarily have to be there, but it may in some cases precede the dative. And we're going to normally translate this by or in, just as we often would other dative case nouns. And like what we said about the correlation of the direct agent and the intermediate agent, or them appearing with one another, so also with the impersonal agent, that you may have a direct agent and an intermediate agent when you see an impersonal agent, or you might have just one or the other, or you might have none. And then the last option for a passive voice is there's no one explicitly that is doing the action of the verb in the sentence. There is none of these, and in that case, the one doing the action of the verb is sometimes implied, and oftentimes, especially in the New Testament, it is implied to be God, that God is the one doing the action. You know, I am saved, or something like this. Without one of these, the implication is that by God, that God is the one producing the action of the saving. So you'll see all four of these different options to indicate who is doing the action of the passive verb. And the last note here, and this is particularly important for translation, is that if there is an agent, if you have one of these things, you know that you have a passive voice verb, not a middle voice verb. Because remember, in the present, the passive and the middle are going to look identical to one another. So these are all only relevant for the passive voice. So if you have one of these, you know that your Greek voice verb is going to be passive and not middle. So what I want to do now is we're going to take a quick lecture pause here, and I want you to just erase your whiteboards and then go ahead and do this quick recap quiz. This is based on what we've presented in the video here, but also on the reading from Black. So go ahead and see what you can make of this, where you're matching the number to the letter over here. So go ahead and just do this on your whiteboard very quickly. Go ahead and pause the video, and then I'll write in our answers up here. So your answers should look something like this. We have C, G, A, F, B, E, D. Once again, if you've got these all right, let's go ahead and high five. Boom. And if you didn't get them right, that's okay. We're going to mix them up and do it one more time. Same exact questions, just in a little bit different order. Repetition helps us remember things, helps us learn things. So once again, pause the video here and go ahead and fill out on your whiteboard our recap quiz while I put the answers in myself. And here we have our answers, and I realized as I was filling out the answers that I alternated between intermediate and indirect agents. So you'll see these actually called both the same things. The intermediate language is the language that Black uses, so I put this in here as well. So the intermediate agent is going to be indicated with dia plus the genitive. The middle voice is going to be translated with myself. The impersonal agent is the dative case, sometimes with the preposition in. The direct agent is indicated by hupa plus the genitive. The passive voice, I am being loosed. The action is happening to me. The active voice, I am loosing. I'm doing the action. And a deponent verb is middle or passive in form, but active in meaning. So once again, if you've gotten these right here, let's go ahead and do the high five. 1, 2, 3, high five. Way to go. And let's do another little bit of active learning here where you're doing some of the work. So I'm going to ask you to identify the verb in the sentence and whether it's middle or passive. So go ahead and we'll do 3 different ones of these. And as always, we'll sort of do it scaffolded. First, I'm going to give you no help here and just ask you to identify whether we have a middle or passive verb. So you're going to have to figure out what the verbs are. If they're middle or passive, so you'll have to figure out which one is middle or passive in form, and then based on the context of the sentence, whether it is middle or passive. The next step is I will highlight the actual verb that we're asking about, then I'll give the translation. So first pause here is pause and see if you can figure out which one is middle or passive in form and whether it is middle or passive. So our word here, our relevant word, is going to be doxadzontai. So now knowing that this is the word that we're looking at, once again, determine whether this is middle or passive. And now I give you the translation, which should give you an even stronger clue. Evil people glorify themselves. Do we have middle or passive? And we have passive because it's the evil people doing it to themselves. You could perhaps make an argument that we have a passive voice verb here. And if that were the case, you would want to translate this: evil people are glorified. They're glorified by someone else that's not mentioned. That's potentially a correct translation, but the context to me suggests more of the middle sense of the evil people glorifying themselves. So let's do another example here. Let's see if you can find the middle or passive voice verb by form and determine whether it's middle or passive in this sentence. So the verb in question is luontai. See if that gives you some help. Is this middle or passive? And our translation: the slaves are being released by the apostles. Middle or passive for our verb here. And so this is what's going to give you the really strong hint that we have a passive voice verb, because this is telling us who is doing the action of the passive verb. By the apostles. The apostles are the direct agents doing the action of the passive voice verb. So hoi douloi are the subject of this verb, and then hupa ton apostolon as a sort of prepositional phrase is indicating the direct agency, who is doing the action. All right, and one more here. Go ahead and look at this sentence, figure out what the middle passive voice verb is and whether it's middle or passive. So there's actually two by form that are middle and or passive here. So erkantai and baptidzantai. And go ahead and pause and determine whether each one is middle or passive. And here's our translation: the faithful women are coming and are being baptized by the brother. See how this helps you with your determination of middle or passive. So what we're going to have is the first case is middle, and the second case is going to be passive. So once again, in our second case here, the direct agency indicated with hupa plus the genitive is going to tell us that we have a passive, because this is the thing or the person, the brother, that is doing the action of baptizing. So the Hai pistai, the faithful women. Here, notice we have a substantive adjective. Hai pistai, this is an adjective that's been made into a noun and is functioning as the subject of both verbs. So they're the subject of baptidzantai, and this is who's doing the action to them. But in the case over here, erkantai, we have a middle voice verb, and notice that it is translated actively. The faithful women are coming. So this is actively translated. So why might we have a middle voice verb that is actively translated here? Yes, absolutely, that's right, because it is deponent. So erkomai in the first person singular is a deponent verb that is going to take middle forms and be translated actively. So we have a middle deponent verb in this case. And let's finish out with a couple of practice sentences here. As always, I'm going to give you this sentence, ask you to take a look at it, and answer some questions before I give you some scaffolding help with it. So what we have here is He suke mu sodzatai hupa tu agathu kuryu. Al he kardia su hetoimadzate to lago tes alethias. So the first thing I want you to do is identify the two present, middle, or passive verbs in this sentence. So see if you can figure out which ones are the present, middle, passive verbs in the sentence. And so now here I'm going to give you these endings, give you our paradigm, and see if this helps you determine which ones are middle or passive. And so I'm sure you nailed it. We have sodzatai and hetoimadzai. So both are going to be third person singulars. And the next thing I want you to do is determine whether each one of these verbs is going to be middle or passive based on the context of the sentence itself. And in both cases, what we're going to have is a passive verb. And the reason that we know this is that we have these sentences, or we have these things that come after them. And so those things that come after them are going to be the direct agent of sodzatai. So I've sort of given you the hint here what the direct agent of sodzatai is. Look up and see if you can find it. That's right. Hupa plus tu agathu. So tu agathu, kuriu, the good Lord, is going to be the direct agent. So our whole sentence is here going to be, my soul is being saved by the good Lord. And then the impersonal agent of hetoimadzatai. I gave you a quick look there by my markings earlier. What's the impersonal agent? That's right, the word, and specifically the word of truth, tes alethios, in the genitive here, modifying the word. So this whole clause here is going to be, but your, su, a possessive personal pronoun in the second person singular, your heart is being prepared by, so notice this is an impersonal thing, it's not a person, by the word of truth. And one more practice here for our present, middle, and passive. I'll go ahead and read our sentence for us. And the first thing that we're going to be asking is the case, gender, and number of eremu. So we have por you esthe, ek tes eremu, kai agesthe, ace ton oikon, hupa tu kuriu. So go ahead and pause and see if you can get the case, gender, and number of eremu here. So this is going to be a genitive feminine singular. Notice this part, this word right here, the definite article, the tes, is going to give us our strong clue of, so if we know that definite article paradigm well, we can get this parsing information out there somewhat easily, despite the fact that eremu is a second declension noun. So this looks like a masculine. We normally associate the u ending with the genitive of the masculine, but eremu is actually a feminine word of the second declension here. So one of those rare cases where a feminine word follows the second declension here. And then so the next question is going to be to identify the two present, middle, or passive verbs in the sentence. So sort of more on topic of what we're doing in this video rather than past recall of material. Go ahead and pause if you can see if you can figure out what the two different middle or passive verbs are here. So they are going to be por you esthe and agesthe. And then the next question that we're going to ask is, what are they? Are they middle or passive based on what you find in the sentence? So go ahead and pause, see if you can figure out if each one is middle or passive. And now with our translation here, this might be help you a little bit more in determining this answer here. Y'all are walking out of the desert and y'all are being led into the house by the Lord. So see how this helps you with determining whether each verb is middle or passive here. And so this first one, por you omai, y'all are walking. So notice that this is translated actively. So we have another case of a middle deponent verb. Por you omai in the first person singular means I walk. And when we're given that form in the omai ending, or with the middle, por you omai, then we know that we have a deponent verb. So it's translated actively despite the fact that it is middle in form. And this one, agesthe over here, notice that we have hupa tu kuriu as our direct agent, the one doing the leading. So we have being led. So this is going to be a passive, and then the direct agent that accompanies the passive is going to give us the strong hint that we have the passive voice and not the middle voice here.